What would you do if the person you welcomed into your family saw your child as nothing but a stepping stone? Samuel Montgomery, a 65-year-old widower, gifted his son a beautiful house for his upcoming wedding, only to watch in horror as his future in-laws invaded, claiming the master bedroom and treating his son like a live-in servant. Take the master bedroom. He can handle all the chores. But they didn't see what was coming. They got smug way too soon and realized far too late, Samuel's son was no one's stepping stone. Will Samuel stand by as his son's dignity is stripped away, or will he fight back? Subscribe now to find out. Samuel Montgomery stood at the window of his study, gazing out at the Boston skyline. At 65, retirement had given him time but taken away purpose. Since losing his wife 3 years ago, his son Daniel had become his world, the last flickering flame of family he had left to nurture. The call had come yesterday. "Dad," Daniel had said, voice trembling with excitement, "Curtis proposed." Samuel's chest tightened at the memory. Curtis Miller seemed decent enough, polite, attentive to Daniel, the kind of young man any parent might cautiously approve of. But there was something in his eyes that Samuel couldn't quite place. A hunger, perhaps. Or maybe Samuel was just being an overprotective father. "You're being ridiculous," he muttered to himself, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Daniel was 32, a grown man capable of making his own decisions. And yet. Samuel sighed, setting down his drink. Curtis's background troubled him. No house, no car, and certainly no financial contribution to the upcoming wedding. His parents lived in a remote town working as farm hands, while his brother and sister-in-law scraped by with odd jobs in the city. What does love have to do with money? Daniel had argued, his eyes burning with the same stubborn determination he'd inherited from his mother. "Not everyone has had our advantages, Dad." Samuel ran his fingers along the edge of his desk. The boy was right, of course. Not everyone had climbed the corporate ladder as successfully as Samuel had. Not everyone had investments, properties, or retirement fund that could support several lifetimes of comfort. The decision formed slowly, like sediment settling in still water. "If I can't give him my blessing without reservation," Samuel reasoned, "I can at least give him security." The next morning, he called his real estate agent. 3 weeks later, he stood outside a stunning standalone home in the Boston suburbs. He'd personally overseen every detail of the renovation, custom designs, hand-picked finishes, the best contractor's money could buy. When the work was complete, Samuel could barely contain his excitement. The house was perfect: 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a spacious kitchen with marble countertops, and a backyard that caught the morning sun. It was the kind of place where a young couple could build a life, raise children, grow old together. "Dad, this is too much," Daniel whispered when Samuel showed him the house, keys dangling from his fingers. "Nonsense," Samuel replied, his voice gruff with emotion. "Your mother would have wanted you to start your marriage on solid ground." Daniel embraced him then, tight and fierce. "Thank you," he murmured against Samuel's shoulder. That night, alone in his apartment, Samuel stared at old photographs, Daniel as a toddler, as a teenager, as a college graduate. His boy, his only child. He wanted to believe he was doing the right thing, giving Daniel and Curtis this gift. He wanted to believe that his misgivings about Curtis were nothing more than an old man's paranoia. "Be happy," he whispered to the image of his son. "That's all I've ever wanted for you." But deep down, beneath layers of hope and self-reassurance, a sliver of doubt remained, sharp as a splinter beneath skin. Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that this gift, this beautiful house meant to be a sanctuary, might somehow become something else entirely. The day the Millers came to see the house, Samuel arrived early. He wanted to witness their reactions firsthand, to see gratitude shine in their eyes when they beheld what their son was marrying into. Instead, before he even stepped through the front door, a shrill voice shattered his expectations. "My God, is this neighborhood a prison? Every house has its doors shut. How am I supposed to visit the neighbors if no one leaves their doors open? Curtis, go tell them to be more neighborly and stop shutting everyone out." Samuel froze on the threshold, his hand still on the doorknob. The voice continued, piercing and demanding. And that front gate? What the hell is that? Looks like a damn fortress, bars locked up so tight like we're guarding a bank. What happens when our relatives visit? Are they supposed to wait outside like beggars? Curtis, get some workers over here and tear that ridiculous thing down. A slow, simmering anger started to build in Samuel's chest. He hadn't even been acknowledged, and already this woman, Curtis's mother, he presumed, was criticizing the security features he'd specifically selected to keep his son safe. Samuel stepped inside, straightening his shoulders. In the living room stood a short, stout woman with hair dyed an unnatural shade of red. Beside her, a balding man wearing a stained work shirt slouched against the wall, lighting a cigarette. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," Samuel said, extending his hand. "I'm Samuel Montgomery, Daniel's father." Mrs. Miller barely glanced at him. "This furniture looks expensive. Seems wasteful for just two people." Samuel's smile stiffened but held. "I wanted them to be comfortable." "Comfortable," she scoffed. "In my day, we didn't worry about comfortable. We were grateful for a roof over our heads." Daniel appeared then, his face tight with embarrassment. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, there's a wonderful community center nearby if you're looking for company. There are game nights, social events, lots of opportunities to meet people." Mrs. Miller wrinkled her nose. "Card games? Please. You think we haven't played cards before?" Then, as if Samuel was invisible, Curtis's parents wandered off to explore, peeking into rooms, inspecting furniture, acting like they already owned the place. Not a single word of gratitude, not a glance of appreciation. Samuel caught Daniel's eye. The boy looked mortified, caught between politeness and disbelief. Curtis rushed over, whispering, "Mr. Montgomery, I know my parents can be lively. They just speak loudly, that's all. But please, I promise they really do love Daniel." Before Samuel could respond, a loud, booming laugh echoed from the master bedroom. "Now this is a damn fine room." Mr. Miller's voice carried through the house. For a split second, Samuel allowed himself to hope. Perhaps they were finally appreciating what he had done for Daniel. Then he stepped into the bedroom and his breath caught in his throat. There was Mrs. Miller, sprawled across the brand new bed like she owned it, legs crossed, shoes still on. The fresh, crisp sheets were already streaked with dirt from the soles of her worn-out sneakers. And next to her, Mr. Miller casually pressed the burning tip of his cigarette against the solid wood nightstand, snuffing it out like it was an old ashtray. A dark, charred mark immediately appeared on the polished surface. Samuel's jaw clenched so tightly he thought he might crack a tooth. Daniel visibly paled, nudging Curtis silently, begging him to intervene. But Curtis only lowered his head, shoulders hunched, looking like a scolded child. Not a word, not a single protest. And then, as if the audacity wasn't already at its peak, Mr. Miller stretched his arms, let out a satisfied sigh, and said, "This room is perfect. Lots of sunlight, great view. We'll take this one." Samuel nearly swore out loud. Had he misheard? Surely they weren't planning to claim the master bedroom, the room intended for his son and Curtis. But the look on Daniel's face told him everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an invasion. The Millers' presumption didn't end with the master bedroom. Like a creeping vine, their entitlement spread through every corner of the house Samuel had so carefully prepared for his son. Mr. Miller strolled out, barely acknowledging Samuel's presence, and wandered into one of the smaller rooms. His eyes swept across the space before he nodded in apparent satisfaction. "This one's perfect. Just right for our grandson." Samuel's brow furrowed. "Grandson?" "Luca. Travis's boy," Mr. Miller clarified, as if Samuel should know these people. He turned to Curtis without hesitation. "Call your brother. Tell him to cancel his lease. He and Jenna should move in right away." Then, as if deciding the matter was already settled, he continued, "We'll put the house in Travis's name. That way, Luca will have a stable home when he starts school here. As for you and Daniel, you can come back and live here once you have kids. Until then, no rush." Samuel felt his last shred of patience snap. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Daniel stepped forward. His son's face had gone pale, but his eyes burned with a quiet fury Samuel hadn't seen since the boy was a teenager. "This house was a gift from my father," Daniel said, his voice cold. "It's not a boarding house for your entire family. Don't you think you're crossing a line?" The room tensed. Mr. Miller's expression darkened, a puff of smoke shooting aggressively from his nostrils as his voice sharpened. "Your house." His lip curled. "You really think this place belongs to you? This is my son's home, which means it's our home. And you have the nerve to talk back to your future father-in-law before you're even married? What, you planning to throw us out once you've got a ring on your finger?" He let his gaze sweep over the room, then scoffed. "Travis is still wasting money on rent every month. This house is huge. It's a shame to let all this space go to waste. Why shouldn't they move in?" Mrs. Miller chimed in instantly, her voice taking on a shrill edge. "I get it, I do. It's your wedding house, but be honest, isn't it a little ridiculous, two people living in a whole damn mansion?" She jabbed a finger toward the smaller room. "What's the big deal if Luca stays here? You don't even have kids yet. Why let a perfectly good room sit empty?" Then, as if this was all some grand act of generosity, she added, "We're not trying to take advantage of you, sweetie. We just don't want you struggling alone. We came here to help, to support you. You should be grateful." Samuel watched his son's face, the hurt and disbelief battling with years of ingrained politeness. But Mrs. Miller wasn't done. She turned her focus to Daniel and smirked. "Besides, you're about to be my son-in-law. It's only right that you take care of us, cooking, cleaning. You're responsible for making sure we're comfortable. Don't get any ideas about slacking off just because you're the groom." Samuel's fingers curled into fists as Mrs. Miller continued, "Honestly, looking at you, I can tell you're not much of a housekeeper. Why don't you save yourself the trouble and have your father hire a maid to take care of us instead?" Daniel's entire body stiffened. Samuel could see tears welling in his son's eyes, but instead of falling, they burned hot, angry. And then finally, Daniel snapped. "If you want a house in the city, if you want to be taken care of, pay for it yourselves. Stop expecting my father to hand you everything." A thick, uncomfortable silence crashed over the room. Mrs. Miller's face twisted in fury. "Curtis, are you hearing this? This is the man you're about to marry, talking like we're some kind of beggars. Since when did his family's money become more important than ours? A married couple shares everything, doesn't he understand that?" Curtis's face paled, his voice rising in alarm. "Daniel, you can't say things like that. Apologize to my parents." Daniel's gaze turned on him, sharp as steel. "Curtis, if you actually believe that, then take your parents and get out of my house. My father bought this for me, not you, not them." Curtis's hand shot out, grabbing Daniel's wrist. "Daniel, come on. You always throw these little tantrums, and I always let it go. But can't you show my parents just a little respect?" Daniel yanked his arm away, turning his back on Curtis completely. Mrs. Miller let out a bitter laugh. "You should be grateful to be marrying a man like Curtis. You think you're too good for us. Look at yourself, you're selfish, spoiled, and completely lacking in respect. Frankly, I don't think you're even good enough for my son." She spun toward Curtis, eyes blazing. "Do you see now? He looks down on us, just like all these city folks do." Daniel met her glare head-on, voice steady. "We're not even married yet, and you're already trying to claim what isn't yours. That's not family. That's greed." Mr. Miller took a slow step forward, exhaling smoke in Samuel's direction. His gaze settled on Samuel, his voice curling with mockery. "Samuel, I have to ask, how exactly did you raise your son? Because I'm seeing a serious lack of discipline here. He's got no respect, no humility, always throwing around, 'my house, my house.' It's exhausting to hear." He took another drag from his cigarette, exhaling slowly. "You wouldn't be looking down on us country folk now, would you?" His eyes narrowed as he added almost lazily, "You know, Curtis didn't turn out like this on his own. He had to be disciplined as a boy, tough love, real parenting. That's why he's polite, hardworking, humble. That's why he has a future in the city." He smiled, but it was sharp, humorless. "Once your son marries into our family, he'll learn his place too. Curtis will teach him how to behave. He'll make sure of it." Curtis stood frozen beside him, silent. And then he nodded, a small, nearly imperceptible movement. But Samuel saw it. They all did. And in that moment, something in Daniel's eyes changed forever. Samuel stared at the Millers, stunned. In all his years, he had never encountered a family this brazen, this shameless. The rage surged to his head, and he let it explode. "How we raise our son is none of your damn business," he growled, stepping closer. "And you have the audacity to lecture us? You couldn't contribute a dime to the wedding. You don't have a house. You don't have a car. You brought absolutely nothing to this marriage." Samuel glared at Curtis, who shrank back like a wilting plant. "Your son, what exactly does he bring to the table besides obedience? He relies on us for everything. So tell me, where does he get the right to make demands?" The Millers stood momentarily stunned, as if no one had ever dared put them in their place before. Then, after a beat, Mr. Miller snapped. "Enough. You done talking? So what if we don't have money? Your son wasn't exactly hard to win over, was he?" His tone turned mocking, his smile sharp and mean. "You think we don't know why? He's past his prime. If he were really worth anything, you wouldn't have to bribe a man to marry him with a house and gifts." Daniel's entire body stiffened, his hands curled into fists. Samuel knew what his son was thinking. For years, Daniel had worried about Curtis feeling insecure. He never flaunted his family's wealth, never bought himself luxury items. Every dinner, every movie date, he paid, pretending it was nothing. And yet here they were, twisting his kindness into desperation. Daniel took a deep, shaking breath. "Dad," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm not marrying him." Samuel turned to his son, seeing the clarity in his eyes, the unwavering certainty in his stance. "I mean it," Daniel continued, glancing at Curtis, then back at Samuel. "You were right. We come from completely different worlds, and this was never going to work." Mrs. Miller let out a cold laugh. "Oh please, don't act like you're the victim here. Even if you call off the wedding, my son would never take you back." Daniel didn't even spare her a glance. He turned to Curtis, his voice as sharp as ice. "Take your parents and leave. We're done." Curtis panicked, reaching for Daniel's wrist. "Dan, come on. Don't do this. Don't be so stubborn." Daniel yanked his arm away like Curtis's touch burned him. "Don't touch me." Mr. Miller let out a derisive laugh. "Look at you, Curtis. Pathetic. She's not even your wife yet, and you can't control her. If you let this slide, she'll walk all over you for the rest of your life." His voice dropped into a sneer. "Are you even a man?" And that was it. Samuel snapped. He grabbed a glass from the table and slammed it onto the floor. The crash echoed through the house, leaving an eerie ringing silence in its wake. Then Samuel moved with a roar of pure fury. He lunged forward and threw a solid punch at Mr. Miller's face. The impact sent Miller staggering backward, slamming into the wall before he collapsed onto the floor, choking on his own breath. A dark red bruise was already blooming across his cheek. Mrs. Miller shrieked, "You're crazy. That was assault. Samuel stood over Mr. Miller, his voice low and menacing. Say another word and you won't make it out of this house. Curtis stood frozen, his face ghostly pale. He didn't dare move. Samuel stepped toward him, and for the first time, Curtis looked afraid. I only said that because he was disrespecting my parents, Curtis stammered. If he apologizes, maybe we can just forget about all this. Before he could finish, Samuel's palm cracked across Curtis's face. The force sent him stumbling backward onto the floor. A bright red handprint bloomed across his cheek. You bastard, Samuel snarled. That was for Daniel. That was for every word you let them say about him. Curtis scrambled backward, his breath coming in panicked gasps, looking like a trapped rat. Mr. Miller, still dazed, started pushing himself up when Samuel turned back to him. I see you now for what you really are, Samuel growled. Even if Daniel wanted to marry into your family, I would never allow it. Samuel tightened his grip on Mr. Miller's collar. My son is smart, beautiful, and capable. He doesn't need your son. In fact, he's too good for him. Samuel shoved Mr. Miller back, letting him drop to the floor. We're not giving you a damn thing. Now get out of my house. Mr. Miller scrambled to his feet, nearly tripping as he ran toward the door. Mrs. Miller grabbed Curtis's arm and dragged him toward the exit. As they rushed down the steps, one of them tripped, and suddenly all three went tumbling down the front stairs, arms and legs flailing. The loud thuds echoed across the driveway. Samuel sighed, shaking his head as he watched them groan on the pavement. Serves them right. Beside him, Daniel stood silent, watching the family that had nearly become his own struggle to their feet and slink away in humiliation. The weeks following what Daniel had taken to calling the incident passed in a strange, suspended state. Samuel found himself checking on his son more frequently, dropping by with groceries, calling in the evenings. Though Daniel assured him he was fine, Samuel recognized the hollow look in his eyes, the same emptiness he'd carried himself after losing his wife. You don't have to keep checking on me, Daniel said one evening, as they sat in his kitchen sharing takeout. I'm not going to fall apart. Samuel nodded, pushing rice around his plate. I know you won't. You're stronger than you think. He paused, searching for the right words. I just want to make sure you know that ending things with Curtis was the right decision. Daniel sighed, setting down his fork. I know it was. I think I'd known for months that something wasn't right, but I kept making excuses. His voice dropped to a whisper. I feel so stupid, Dad. Don't, Samuel said firmly. There's nothing stupid about wanting to see the best in someone you love. But you saw through them immediately, Daniel countered. You knew something was off from the start. Samuel shrugged. I've had more years to learn how to spot users and takers. It comes with age. They fell silent, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant noise of traffic from the street below. Finally, Daniel spoke again. I keep thinking about what Mr. Miller said, about me being past my prime, about you having to bribe someone to marry me. His voice wavered slightly. What if they were right? Samuel's hand tightened around his fork. They weren't right about a damn thing, and you know it. Those people are parasites, Daniel. They saw your kindness as weakness and try to exploit it. Daniel nodded, but Samuel could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. He reached across the table and took his son's hand. Listen to me. You are kind, intelligent, and successful in your own right. Any person would be lucky to have you in their life. Curtis didn't deserve you, he never did. A faint smile touched Daniel's lips. You're just saying that because you're my dad. I'm saying it because it's true, Samuel replied firmly. That night, as Samuel drove home, he found himself gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The Millers' words kept echoing in his head, their casual cruelty toward his son, their breathtaking entitlement. The memory of Mr. Miller's face as Samuel's fist connected with it brought a grim satisfaction, quickly followed by shame. Violence had never been his way of solving problems. "You're 65 years old," he muttered to himself. "Too old to be starting fistfights." But deep down, he knew he'd do it again in a heartbeat if it meant protecting Daniel. The following week, Samuel stopped by the house again, this time with dinner from Daniel's favorite Italian restaurant. He found his son sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his phone with an expression of disbelief. "What's wrong?" Samuel asked, setting down the bags of food. Without a word, Daniel handed him the phone. "He actually emailed me," he said flatly. "Curtis." Samuel frowned, taking the phone. Daniel had already blocked Curtis on every possible platform: calls, texts, social media. Yet somehow, he had found a way to weasel back in. The subject line was simple: "Daniel, since we've broken up, it's only fair that you pay me back what you owe." Samuel's eyebrows shot up. "You borrowed money from him?" Daniel let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Check the attachment." Samuel clicked on the file, and his blood pressure nearly doubled. It was a spreadsheet, a meticulously organized, itemized list of every single dollar Curtis had apparently spent on Daniel over the course of their relationship. Tuesday, Starbucks, 2 coffees, $11.80. Valentine's Day flowers, $20. Uber ride last weekend, $14. Line after line, neatly laid out, tracking a full year of expenses like Daniel was some kind of investment Curtis wanted a return on. At the bottom, in bold, total, $2,897.36. "I'll be generous. Just send me $2,897 and we'll call it even." Samuel stared at the screen, utterly speechless. Samuel could feel the heat rising to his face, his hands curling into fists. This man had no shame. Did Curtis really think they didn't know the truth? For nearly every dinner, movie, or trip they had taken, Daniel had been the one paying. Curtis had taken their family to dinner once, at a fast food chain, on his birthday. On Curtis's birthday, Daniel had bought him the latest iPhone, spending over $1,200. On Daniel's birthday, all he got was a $200 gift card. And when Curtis's father had that health scare last year, Samuel himself had visited the hospital with a $1,500 gift for medical expenses. But now, Curtis wanted to bill Daniel. The audacity. And to top it all off, Daniel said, scrolling down to the end of the email, "There's this lovely threat: if you don't pay up, I'll have no choice but to go to your workplace and settle this in person." "Settle what, exactly?" Samuel growled. "This isn't just absurd, it's pathetic." Daniel ran his hands through his hair, his expression caught between anger and exhaustion. "What should I do, Dad? Just pay him to make him go away?" Samuel considered the options, turning them over in his mind like smooth stones. "No," he finally said. "If you pay him now, you're just telling him that harassment works. He'll keep coming back, demanding more. But if he shows up at my office, then we'll deal with it," Samuel interrupted firmly. "Together." For the next few days, Samuel found himself checking his phone constantly, waiting for news from Daniel. The threat of Curtis appearing at his son's workplace hung over them like a storm cloud, darkening even the brightest moments. On Thursday morning, the call finally came. "Dad," Daniel's voice was tight with tension. "They're here. All of them. At my office." Samuel was already grabbing his keys. "I'm on my way. Don't engage until I get there." The drive to Daniel's workplace, the downtown offices of Granite Group, where Daniel had built a respectable career in marketing, took Samuel 20 minutes. Each minute felt like an hour, his mind racing with scenarios, with things he would say, with ways to protect his son from further humiliation. When the elevator doors slid open on the 15th floor, Samuel immediately knew something was wrong. A crowd had gathered near the lobby, murmuring and pointing toward the entrance. The air buzzed with anticipation, like people were watching some kind of spectacle. And right in the center of it all, Curtis and his parents. Curtis himself was hunched in a corner, his head down as if trying to shrink out of sight. But his parents, they were shouting like street protesters. Mrs. Miller's shrill voice rang through the air. "Where is your supervisor? I want to see a manager. We're here for Daniel Montgomery. He owes my son money and refuses to pay up." The gathered employees exchanged puzzled glances, whispering among themselves. More people trickled in, drawn by the commotion. Then, as Samuel and Daniel stepped out of another elevator, the entire floor fell silent. All eyes snapped to them. Mrs. Miller, spotting Daniel immediately, pointed a finger and raised her voice another octave. "Everyone, listen up. This man, your coworker, dated my son for a whole year. He spent his money, enjoyed his generosity, and now that they've broken up, he thinks he can just walk away without paying him back. You tell me, is that fair?" The whispering resumed, louder than before. "Wait, is that true? I thought he came from money. Isn't his dad some executive? What if all that was just an act?" Daniel's entire face turned red. Samuel could feel his son's shoulders trembling. He had never been in a situation like this, humiliated in public, treated like some con artist. He had always been poised, professional, well-respected. And now, in an instant, Curtis's family had reduced him to a spectacle. Samuel stepped forward, gently placing a hand on Daniel's back, reassuring him silently. He squared his shoulders, crossed his arms, and fixed his gaze on Mrs. Miller. Just like that, the moment Samuel stepped in, their arrogance wavered. They had already felt Samuel's wrath once before, they knew what he was capable of. Still, Mrs. Miller puffed up her chest, trying to salvage her performance. "We just want what's fair. Your son owes my son money, and we're here to collect." Samuel arched an eyebrow, his voice cool and cutting. "Oh, since we're making such a public scene, let's clarify exactly how much he owes you." Mrs. Miller hesitated for half a second, then straightened her back and practically shouted, $2,897.36. The room froze, a beat of complete silence. And then, a burst of laughter. "Wait, what? This whole mess over less than 3,000? I thought he owed hundreds of thousands or something. And did she just say 36 cents? Who even calculates like that?" The whispers turned to outright mockery. Mrs. Miller's expression faltered, but Mr. Miller stepped up, determined to salvage their dignity. He reached behind him and pulled out a giant poster board, holding it up like some bizarre protest sign. "This is a full breakdown of every single expense my son paid for him. Coffee, movie tickets, dinners, look at the numbers." He started reading off transactions, his voice booming like he was presenting a corporate budget report. But the more he talked, the more the crowd reacted. "Dude, is he seriously itemizing every cup of coffee? Wait, Valentine's Day flowers, $20. Is that a joke? Man, even my cheapest ex wasn't this bad. He kept a record of every coffee. That's not budgeting, that's psycho behavior." Samuel knew this was his moment. Samuel stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. The crowd hushed, sensing the shift in atmosphere. With deliberate slowness, Samuel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his checkbook. The room fell completely silent as he uncapped his pen. "All right," Samuel said, his voice clear and steady. "Since they're demanding payment, let's do this properly." He wrote a check for $3,000, making sure everyone saw the amount. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed it toward Curtis. The check fluttered through the air and landed at his feet. "There. Every penny you claim, plus a little extra. We've paid in full." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Miller lunged for the check, snatching it up. For a second, she looked victorious, until Samuel smiled. Now, Curtis, he drawled, his voice razor sharp, since we're settling debts, let's talk about what you owe Daniel. Curtis froze, his face draining of color. He knew exactly what Samuel meant, and the moment he said it, the crowd did too. Mrs. Miller shrieked, her voice shrill with desperation. What money? That's nonsense. Samuel let out a cold laugh. Let's go over the numbers, shall we? For Curtis's birthday, my son bought him a brand new phone, $200. When his father fell ill, I personally brought a gift worth $1,500. He pulled out his phone and tapped on the screen. I have the receipts right here. That's already more than $2,500, not including all the other everyday costs we haven't accounted for. He turned to the crowd, raising his voice just enough to let it carry. Tell me, everyone, shouldn't he pay that money back? The response was immediate. Of course he should. That's way more than what they're demanding from him. Talk about hypocrisy. The chorus of agreement was thunderous, and the Millers flinched, their faces pale and stiff. Mrs. Miller, still clinging to whatever scraps of dignity she had left, huffed defiantly. You're making this up. Lies. Slander. Daniel finally stepped forward, his patience snapped. If you don't want to acknowledge the truth, fine. Let's take this somewhere else. His voice was sharp and unwavering. He turned his gaze, locking onto Curtis. How about we go to your office, stand outside your company, and put this on display for your colleagues to see? Would you like that, Curtis? The color drained from Curtis's face instantly. His company was just 2 floors above, there was no running from this. Mrs. Miller's face twisted in fury. You ungrateful little, and then she lunged, her hand swinging up, aiming straight for Daniel's face. But Samuel was ready. The moment her arm moved, he stepped forward, placing himself between them. His voice was low, calm, and unwavering. You better put that hand down. A chilling silence settled over the room. Mrs. Miller's arm froze midair, her face locked in a stiff, stunned expression. Samuel didn't blink. He didn't waver. He simply stared her down. And then, slowly, deliberately, he shifted his gaze to Curtis. You came here to cause a scene, but all you've done is tear apart whatever little dignity you had left. Curtis stared at the floor, silent, defeated. Samuel took a deep breath and then turned to Daniel. Let's go. We're taking this to his company's management and handling it professionally. No yelling, no threats, just calm, decisive action. Without another word, they turned and walked toward the elevator. They didn't look back, they didn't need to. The damage had already been done. The supervisor arrived quickly, his expression polite but puzzled. Can you tell me what's going on? He asked, glancing between them and the growing crowd. Samuel pulled out Curtis's own email, holding it out as he calmly summarized the situation. We're not here to argue, he said, his voice steady. We simply want a fair resolution. The supervisor skimmed the email, his frown deepening. Then one of his assistants stepped up and whispered something in his ear. The supervisor's eyes flickered toward Samuel, his demeanor shifting instantly. Excuse me, are you Mr. Montgomery from Granite Group? Samuel nodded, offering a composed smile. That's me. Immediately, the supervisor straightened, his tone becoming formally polite, even apologetic. I sincerely regret that this situation has escalated to such a level. Our company takes professionalism and ethical behavior very seriously. I'll be speaking to Curtis privately to address this. He turned to Curtis, his tone hardening. Curtis, I am truly disappointed. Keeping detailed accounts of personal expenses, demanding repayment after a breakup, and causing a public disturbance outside another company's office, this is completely inappropriate. Curtis's face went ghost white. He opened his mouth, scrambling for an excuse. I didn't think it would turn into this. The supervisor cut him off. You have not only embarrassed yourself but have also damaged this company's image. This will be reported to HR. Curtis visibly shrank, his head dipping lower and lower, his hands twisting together as he nodded weakly. His arrogance, his entitlement, completely gone. Samuel nodded, offering the supervisor a polite thank you. It was done. He turned to Daniel, ready to leave, but just as they took a step, "Wait. This isn't over." The sharp, grating voice of Mrs. Miller sliced through the air. Samuel paused, then slowly turned back, fixing her with a calm, unreadable stare. He didn't need to say anything because, at that moment, everyone knew exactly who had already won. A few weeks passed, and life finally seemed to return to normal. Daniel settled back into his routine: work, coffee dates with friends, weekend runs in the park. He looked better, lighter, no longer carrying the weight of past stress on his shoulders. Samuel had an unspoken agreement not to bring up Curtis or anything that had happened. He didn't want to risk reopening wounds that were still healing. Daniel was doing well, at least in front of him. He made sure everything appeared in order, until that night. Daniel walked in with takeout in hand, but something in his expression was off. Samuel glanced at him while setting the table. "Work okay?" Daniel hesitated, then wordlessly handed him his phone. The screen displayed a text from an unknown number, but the words were painfully familiar. "Daniel, I've been thinking a lot lately. I know I messed up. I shouldn't have listened to my parents, and I should never have taken my frustration out on you. I have nothing now, but I want to start over. Will you give me another chance?" Samuel exhaled slowly and looked up at his son. "Is this the first one?" "Third," Daniel's voice was quiet. "I haven't responded." Samuel nodded. "Good. Silence is the clearest answer." Daniel sighed, staring into his coffee. I don't understand. Is he actually sorry, or does he just hate losing?" "Probably both," Samuel replied evenly. "But that's not your problem anymore. His growth isn't your responsibility." Daniel stared out the window, saying nothing. Samuel knew his son's heart wasn't wavering, it wasn't love he was struggling with. It was habit, the emotional residue of investing so much into someone only to realize they were never worth it. Then, just a few days later, things took a sharp turn. That evening, Daniel walked in with a different look, not sadness, but something colder, sharper. He set his phone on the counter. "Dad, look at this." Samuel picked it up, and the moment his eyes landed on the screen, his stomach twisted. A social media post, an anonymous message. Attached was a blurred photo and edited video clips, carefully pieced together to paint a false narrative. The caption was nothing short of vicious. "Real-life gold digger extorted his ex after the breakup. Bragged about his wealthy background. Guess he's not so untouchable now, huh?" A slow, simmering rage built in Samuel's chest. Do we even need to guess who did this? Daniel shook his head. I can't trace the account, but look at the content, these pictures, these clips. It's all from Curtis. He cropped himself out, used an anonymous account, but we both know. Samuel clenched his jaw. So now he's resorting to this. Daniel let out a slow breath, the exhaustion settling in. I just wanted to move on. Why can't he let me? Samuel took his son's hand, squeezing it firmly. Because he's not stuck on you, he's stuck on his own ego. He's not capable of moving forward, so all he knows how to do is drag people backward. That very night, Samuel reached out to an old college friend, now a lawyer at a well-known firm. By the next morning, they had formally issued a legal notice demanding the removal of the anonymous defamatory content, along with a request to preserve the poster's IP information for potential legal action. They also filed a civil harassment report, ensuring there was now an official record of Curtis's actions. For the moment, things seemed to settle, but Curtis wasn't done. A week later, Daniel received a package in the mail. Inside was a handwritten letter from Curtis. The tone dripped with regret, self-blame, and nostalgia. He wrote about their first date, the way Daniel smiled, the nights he stayed up caring for Curtis's sick father, every line carefully crafted to tug at emotions. But then the last few sentences revealed the truth. I can't accept you walking away completely. You know I have nothing left. You were my only light. If you don't come back, I don't know what I might do. This wasn't an apology, this was emotional blackmail. Samuel's expression darkened as he read the final words. Without hesitation, he called their lawyer and started the process to file for a restraining order. That afternoon, Samuel and Daniel went to the courthouse together. Daniel sat on a bench, gripping the letter so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Dad," his voice was quiet, strained. "I know I'm handling this the right way, but why does it still feel so exhausting?" Samuel placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not tired from doing the right thing. You're tired because healing takes energy, and right now, you're healing from someone who tried to break you. But you're already doing everything right." Daniel exhaled slowly, then met his father's gaze. For the first time, there was no hesitation in his eyes. "I won't let him hurt me again." Samuel smiled faintly. "That's my son." A few weeks later, the court officially approved the temporary restraining order, legally barring Curtis from contacting or approaching Daniel in any way. They also provided all supporting evidence to Granite Group's legal team, ensuring there was a record on file in case of any future issues. This time they weren't waiting for Curtis to apologize. They weren't giving him a single chance to reappear in their lives. Daniel had finally broken free. He was no longer the man who tiptoed around someone else's emotions, no longer the partner who compromised, apologized, or tried to fix someone who refused to change. He had stepped fully into his own life and, without realizing it, had begun to move beyond the limits he once set for himself. Daniel poured himself into work, no longer letting emotions derail his focus. Instead of hesitating, he took on multiple projects at once, proving his ability to thrive under pressure. He knew what he wanted and, more importantly, what he no longer needed. Samuel watched this transformation with quiet pride. His son was becoming steel, forged in fire, stronger for having been tested. The boy who had once sought validation through selfless giving was becoming a man who understood his own worth. And yet, Samuel couldn't help but worry that the wounds, though healing, might leave scars that would never fully fade. Then came the regional business conference. Granite Group chose Daniel to represent the firm at a major industry networking event. Samuel, invited as a distinguished former executive, watched from the audience as his son took the stage. Daniel stood tall, delivering a presentation with confidence and precision. The audience, executives, investors, and industry leaders, listened attentively, nodding in approval. By the end, several corporate representatives approached Daniel, eager to exchange business cards, hoping to explore future collaborations. That one event subtly but irreversibly shifted the course of Daniel's career, and with it, his life. At a casual networking luncheon after the conference, Daniel was introduced to Ethan Parker. Ethan was one of the co-founders of East Bay Capital, an MIT graduate and member of a well-known San Francisco business family. But unlike the arrogance often associated with privilege, Ethan was thoughtful, articulate, and composed. Their conversation was brief. No unnecessary small talk, no intentional exchange of contacts, just a natural, unforced discussion before they both moved on with their day. But the following week, Daniel received a letter, handwritten. It wasn't a grand declaration nor an eager invitation. It was a genuine thank you note, acknowledging the strength of Daniel's presentation and offering insightful feedback on his business model. Along with it, Ethan had included a book on leadership and strategy, something he thought Daniel might find interesting. When Daniel showed him the letter, Samuel couldn't resist a small smile. "Well, at least this one didn't send you an invoice after your first conversation." Daniel chuckled but said nothing more. Still, there was something different in his expression, a quiet ease that hadn't been there before. Over the coming months, their conversations became more frequent but never forced. They exchanged industry insights, attended small business forums, and occasionally grabbed coffee to discuss market trends. Samuel noticed the change in his son, the way Daniel's face lit up when he mentioned Ethan's name, the way he checked his phone more often, the new energy in his step. But Samuel was cautious. The wounds from Curtis were still fresh, and he didn't want to see his son hurt again. "You've been spending a lot of time with Ethan lately," Samuel remarked casually one evening as they shared dinner. Daniel nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "He's different, Dad. He listens, really listens. And he never makes me feel like I owe him anything." Samuel studied his son's face. "You seem happier." "I am," Daniel admitted. "But I'm also scared. What if I'm wrong again? What if I can't trust my judgment?" Samuel reached across the table, patting his son's hand. "That's the risk we all take when we open ourselves up to someone new. But not taking that risk, that's its own kind of loss." One evening, as they drove home from dinner, Daniel was unusually quiet. Samuel glanced over, noticing his son's pensive expression. "Everything okay?" Daniel hesitated, then said, "Ethan asked me out. Not as colleagues, not as friends, on a real date." Samuel kept his eyes on the road, careful to keep his tone neutral. "And what did you say?" "I said I needed time to think," Daniel replied softly. I think I want to say yes. But I'm terrified." Samuel nodded, understanding. "Fear is natural after what you've been through. But ask yourself, is the fear about Ethan, or is it about what Curtis did to you?" Daniel considered this, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. "It's not about Ethan," he finally said. "He's given me no reason to doubt him." "Then perhaps," Samuel suggested gently, "it's time to start letting the past be the past." The next morning, Daniel called Ethan and accepted his invitation. Their first official date was simple, dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the harbor. When Daniel came home that night, his eyes were bright, his smile genuine. "He walked me to the door," Daniel told Samuel, "and then he just said goodnight. No pressure, no expectations. He said he wanted to take things slowly, to do this right." Samuel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This was what his son deserved: patience, respect, genuine interest. As weeks passed, Daniel blossomed. He laughed more easily, spoke more confidently. The shadows that had lingered in his eyes since the breakup with Curtis began to fade. Ethan soon became a regular presence in their lives, joining them for Sunday dinners, helping Daniel with home repairs, even assisting Samuel with his volunteer work at the Veterans Center. Unlike Curtis, Ethan came from genuine wealth, but he wore it lightly, with none of the entitlement or smugness that had characterized the Millers. He was generous without being showy, confident without being arrogant. Most importantly, he treated Daniel as an equal, a partner to be respected, not a prize to be claimed or a resource to be exploited. One evening, after Ethan had left, Daniel sat quietly with Samuel on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You know," Daniel said softly, "I think I'm finally understanding what a healthy relationship feels like." Samuel smiled, his heart full. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, son." "I know, Dad," Daniel replied, reaching over to squeeze his father's hand. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I almost gave up on myself." In that moment, Samuel knew that his son was truly healing, not just covering his wounds, but allowing them to close properly, becoming stronger at the broken places. Spring melted into summer, and with the changing season came a transformation in Daniel. He had always been competent, always been kind, but now there was a new confidence in his step, a quiet certainty in his decisions. Samuel noticed it most in the small moments, the way Daniel no longer hesitated before speaking in meetings, the ease with which he navigated social gatherings, the clarity with which he expressed his boundaries. Ethan was good for him. Unlike Curtis, who had demanded center stage in Daniel's life, Ethan moved alongside him, supporting without smothering, present without possessing. One evening, Ethan invited Samuel and Daniel to dinner at his parents' home. Samuel was apprehensive. The last family he'd met had tried to claim his son's house, after all. "Are you sure about this?" Samuel asked as they drove to the Parker residence. Daniel smiled, reaching over to pat his father's knee. "Don't worry, Dad. The Parkers aren't the Millers. I've met them before at charity events, they're good people." The Parker home was an elegant brownstone in Beacon Hill, understated luxury that spoke of old money and refined taste. When they arrived, Mrs. Parker herself opened the door, greeting them with genuine warmth. "Daniel. So wonderful to see you again," she said, embracing him before turning to Samuel. "And you must be the famous Samuel Montgomery. Ethan speaks so highly of you." Mr. Parker, a distinguished man with silver at his temples, shook Samuel's hand firmly. "A pleasure to finally meet you, Samuel. I hear we have a mutual friend in Judge Harrington." Samuel blinked in surprise. "You know William?" "Harvard Law, class of '83, Mr. Parker replied with a smile. "Small world, isn't it?" Dinner was nothing like the uncomfortable meals they'd endured with the Millers. The conversation flowed easily, touching on politics, art, business, family. The Parkers asked questions and genuinely listened to the answers. They showed interest without prying, shared without boasting. Mrs. Parker personally prepared a small dessert and smiled warmly. "This is the first time Ethan has ever invited someone home. I had to make sure I did it right." Later that evening, as Ethan showed Daniel his father's collection of first edition books, Mr. Parker pulled Samuel aside. "She's remarkable," he said quietly, nodding toward Daniel. "Smart, poised, and she knows her own mind. We're glad Ethan met someone like her." Samuel's throat tightened unexpectedly. There was no entitlement in Mr. Parker's words, no grasping demands, no pressure for submission, just a family that valued genuine connection and mutual respect. It was everything the Millers weren't, and for the first time, Samuel could truly see it. Daniel was finally in a place where he was safe, where he was cherished. The evening came to a close with warm goodbyes and promises to meet again soon. As they drove home, Samuel glanced at his son, whose face was lit by the passing streetlights. "I like them," Samuel said simply. Daniel's smile was soft, contented. "I know. They're real, aren't they? Not perfect, but real." The days that followed seemed to shimmer with possibility. Daniel and Ethan's relationship deepened, growing roots that seemed strong enough to weather any storm. Samuel watched with a father's cautious hope, always alert for signs of trouble, but seeing none. Then came the charity gala for Boston Children's Hospital. Daniel and Ethan attended together, their first official appearance as a couple in Boston's social circles. Samuel, unable to attend due to a mild cold, received a text from Daniel that evening. "Everyone loves Ethan. No surprise there. But Dad, you should hear how he talks about me to others. It's like he's proud just to be with me. I've never felt that before." Samuel smiled at his phone, typing back, "That's how it should be, son. Always." The next morning, a photo surfaced online, a candid shot of Daniel and Ethan at the gala. With Ethan's family name attached to the image, it didn't take long for the picture to circulate within industry circles. And, inevitably, reach Curtis. Samuel was halfway through his morning coffee when Daniel called, his voice tight with tension. "Curtis just showed up at my office," Daniel said without preamble. "He's waiting outside the building." Samuel was already grabbing his keys. "Don't engage. I'm on my way." But by the time Samuel arrived, the situation had already escalated. Daniel stood outside the building entrance, his posture rigid. Facing him was Curtis, his face pale, his expression twisted. "So this is it," Curtis was saying, his voice low and burning with resentment. "You dumped me and ran straight into another man's arms." Daniel didn't flinch, meeting Curtis's gaze directly. "Curtis, walk away. You have no right to question me." Curtis's nostrils flared. You were planning this all along, weren't you? Were you already with him when you were still with me? Daniel's voice turned to steel. You need to stop. I have a restraining order against you. If you're following me, I'll call the police right now. Curtis's face twitched, his hands clenching at his sides. He was about to lash out again when another presence stepped forward from the parking lot. Ethan approached, his posture calm, his expression unreadable. But his presence alone shifted the air. He moved beside Daniel, his voice even yet firm. I don't know who you are, Ethan said, but if you take one more step toward him, I'll call the police myself. Curtis blinked, startled. He hadn't noticed Ethan arriving, and he certainly hadn't expected this confrontation. You're the new boyfriend, his voice turned mocking, but there was a crack in his bravado. You think you're better than me? Ethan didn't rise to the bait. It doesn't matter who I am, he said calmly. What matters is that you understand, he is no longer someone you can hurt. There was no yelling, no dramatic standoff, yet the weight of Ethan's words seemed to suffocate Curtis more than any fight ever could. For a moment, Curtis just stood there, staring at them, Daniel standing tall, untouched by his anger, Ethan beside him, unshaken, immovable. And something broke inside him. He finally understood, the man he had once criticized, belittled, controlled was now standing in a different world, bathed in light he could never reach. He didn't even have the right to stand beside Daniel anymore. As they walked away, Curtis stood frozen, his face unreadable, a storm of rage, regret, and finality. But the world had moved on without him. And Daniel never looked back. The news of Curtis's appearance at Daniel's workplace spread quickly among their close circle. Samuel's first instinct was to strengthen the legal barriers, to file for a permanent restraining order, to ensure that Curtis would face serious consequences if he ever came near Daniel again. But Daniel surprised him. I don't think we need to, he said, his voice calm and certain. He finally understands it's over. Samuel wasn't convinced. Curtis has shown a pattern of escalation, son. Just because he backed down this time doesn't mean, it's different now, Daniel interrupted gently. You didn't see his face, Dad. He looked defeated. Not angry, not vindictive, just hollow, like he finally realized he has no power over me anymore. Samuel studied his son's face, trying to gauge if this was wishful thinking or genuine insight. You're sure about this? Daniel nodded. I'm not afraid of him anymore. That's what matters. And he was right. In the weeks that followed, Curtis made no further attempts to contact Daniel. The anonymous social media posts ceased. The late-night calls from unknown numbers stopped. It was as if Curtis had finally accepted the reality that Daniel had moved on, not just to a new relationship, but to a new self that was no longer vulnerable to his manipulation. Summer deepened into fall. Leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold, then drifted to the ground, carpeting the streets of Boston. Daniel and Ethan's relationship continued to flourish, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. They took things slowly, mindful of Daniel's recent heartbreak and determined to create something lasting. Samuel watched with cautious optimism, always braced for signs of trouble but increasingly willing to believe that his son had found someone worthy of his trust. Then came Thanksgiving, the first major holiday since Daniel and Curtis's breakup. Samuel had always hosted the celebration at his home, and this year would be no different, except for one significant addition: Ethan would be joining them. The morning of the holiday, Samuel rose early to prepare the turkey. As he worked in the kitchen, memories of past Thanksgivings washed over him, his late wife setting the table, fussing over the centerpiece, Daniel as a child, sneaking pieces of bread when he thought no one was looking, family gatherings filled with laughter and warmth. Last Thanksgiving, Curtis had been at their table, charming and attentive, or so it had seemed. Now, Samuel could recognize the performance for what it was, a calculated effort to ingratiate himself with their family, to secure his place in their world. How different things would be this year. The doorbell rang precisely at noon. Daniel answered it, and Samuel heard the low murmur of his son's voice mingling with Ethan's deeper tone. Then laughter, genuine, unforced, followed by footsteps approaching the kitchen. "Happy Thanksgiving, Samuel," Ethan said, offering a bottle of wine. "I hope it's not too presumptuous, but I brought my mother's cranberry sauce recipe." She insisted. Samuel accepted both gifts with a smile. "Not presumptuous at all. We're glad to have you here." As they moved around the kitchen, finishing the preparations, Samuel was struck by the ease between them, the natural flow of conversation, the absence of the tension that had always lingered when Curtis was present. Daniel was relaxed, his movements fluid, his smile reaching his eyes. He didn't flinch when Ethan touched his shoulder, didn't tense when their hands brushed reaching for the same dish. It was in these small moments that Samuel saw most clearly how far his son had come. They were just sitting down to dinner when Samuel's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, frowning at the unfamiliar number. "Excuse me," he said, stepping away from the table. "I should take this." It was his lawyer. "Samuel, I thought you should know, Curtis Miller was arrested last night." Samuel's breath caught. "What happened?" "Drunk and disorderly conduct. He caused a scene at a restaurant where Daniel and Ethan were having dinner. Security escorted him out, but he returned and attempted to force his way back in. The police were called." Samuel closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Was anyone hurt?" "No, but there's more. Curtis has apparently been spiraling for some time. He lost his job. His parents returned to their hometown. He's been staying with his brother, but according to the police report, they're evicting him at the end of the month." A complicated mix of emotions washed over Samuel: anger, pity, vindication, sadness. What happens now? The restraining order stands. Curtis will likely face probation, possibly mandatory counseling. I don't think he'll be bothering Daniel again, he has too much to lose. Samuel thanked him and ended the call, standing for a moment in the hallway, collecting his thoughts. He returned to the dining room, where Daniel and Ethan were deep in conversation. Daniel looked up, immediately sensing something was wrong. "Dad? Who was that?" Samuel hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My lawyer. Curtis was arrested last night, drunk and disorderly conduct." Daniel's face paled slightly. "Is he okay?" The question surprised Samuel. After everything Curtis had put him through, Daniel's first concern was still for his well-being. It spoke volumes about his son's character. "He's fine," Samuel assured him. "But he's in trouble, legal trouble, financial trouble. He's lost his job, and his family's abandoned him here in Boston." Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing this information. Then he reached for Ethan's hand, squeezing it gently. "I hope he gets the help he needs," he said quietly. "But I can't be the one to give it to him." Ethan squeezed back, his eyes full of understanding. "You've done more than enough." In that moment, Samuel knew that the final ties binding Daniel to his past had been severed. Not with anger or bitterness, but with compassion and the quiet strength of someone who had found their way forward. A week after Thanksgiving, Samuel and Daniel walked along the narrow path by Jamaica Pond, their steps slow and unhurried. The gravel crunched softly beneath their feet, and behind them, the trees swayed in the winter breeze, their bare branches sketched against the pale sky. This was a place they had visited often when Daniel was little. He had loved hopping across the smooth stones by the water's edge, making Samuel's heart leap every time he wobbled. Samuel would reach out, gripping the sleeve of his son's jacket, trying to keep him steady. Now Daniel's steps were firm, measured, his gaze clear and steady as he looked out over the water. "Do you remember how I used to run into the water to collect stones?" Daniel asked suddenly. Samuel smiled. "Of course. You always said each one was unique, that you had to take them all home and wash them properly." Daniel laughed softly. "Back then, I thought every little detail in the world was worth holding on to." "And now?" Samuel asked. Daniel paused, thoughtful. "Now I know some things are meant to stay in your heart, not in your life. Samuel turned to look at his son. He was no longer the little boy who had panicked when things went wrong, no longer the young man who had sought validation through endless giving. "Dad," Daniel spoke again, his voice quieter. "What do you think people spend their whole lives chasing?" Samuel didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out at the water, where the winter sunlight reflected in soft, shifting ripples. "I think it's different for everyone," he finally said. "But for me, it's peace." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Not happiness?" Samuel shook his head. "Happiness is tricky. Sometimes it's just someone else's expectations. Sometimes it's just a fleeting rush. But peace, that's something you build for yourself. It's not given, and it's not something that happens overnight." They walked in silence for a moment, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "I used to think I had to be loved by someone else to feel like my life had meaning," Daniel said, his voice soft as the evening air. "But now, I think learning to love myself is the most important thing. That's enough." Samuel nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "That's more than enough." Daniel smiled at him. "You've always known this, haven't you?" Samuel didn't answer. He just held his son's gaze, and in that moment, he knew Daniel didn't need him to shield him anymore. He had learned how to stand in the wind, to listen to the water, to hear the voices of the world and decide for himself which ones mattered. They kept walking side by side along the lake's edge. In the distance, a few ducks drifted lazily across the water, their movement sending gentle ripples outward, one after another. And suddenly it struck Samuel, this path, they had walked countless times before. The difference was that back then, Daniel had always looked to him to find his way. Now, he could walk it on his own. But every now and then, he still chose to reach for his father's hand. And that was enough. At 65, Samuel had learned that love wasn't about possession or protection. It was about watching someone grow into themselves, about standing witness to their journey, about being a safe harbor in storms but never clipping their sails. As they turned to head back, the setting sun painted the world in amber light. Daniel spoke of his future plans with Ethan, perhaps a home of their own, perhaps a family someday. His voice held none of the desperate need that had characterized his relationship with Curtis, only calm certainty and joyful anticipation. Samuel listened, his heart full. The house he had gifted would be sold, too many painful memories lingered there. But a new chapter was beginning, one written not in reaction to pain but in pursuit of joy. "I'm proud of you," Samuel said simply. Daniel smiled, a man at peace with himself at last. "I know, Dad. I know." My dear friend, thank you for joining us in this story, a story that reminds us all that love should lift us up, never diminish us. Too often, we mistake control for care and possession for love. Real love means respecting boundaries, celebrating independence, and supporting growth, never exploitation or manipulation. If you've ever felt undervalued in a relationship or watched someone you love struggle with emotional manipulation, know that you're not alone, and it's never too late to reclaim your worth. Your story matters, and we hope sharing Samuel and Daniel's journey has brought you strength and perspective. If you found value in this story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that illuminate the human experience. Remember, you are nobody's stepping stone.